Hello, hello. Oh, that sounds good. Loud. So, hello. Good morning. Good morning. How do you say that in Swedish?
Good morning.
That's good morning. So, I thought that we could start with some meditation. Usually it's said that morning is a good time for meditation because the atmosphere is more quiet. Sometimes it can be very noisy at night. And also our mind might be in a better state for meditation, provided we had a good night's sleep. If you were able to sleep well last night, then your mind should be sort of refreshed and awake and alert, whereas in the evening sometimes we're exhausted, so then it's hard to meditate. So we'll do a little bit of mindfulness meditation. So there's different ways of doing mindfulness meditation. You might already know a method, and please feel free to use that. Otherwise, if you don't know a method for doing mindfulness meditation, then you can just use the breath. So I'll guide a little introduction to that practice, and then we'll do it together for a while. So when we meditate, it's best if we can sit with a straight back. So it's important to be comfortable, to be in a comfortable position. So whether you're sitting on the floor with your legs crossed, or you're sitting on a chair, try to be relaxed, not tense or tight. But at the same time, try to keep your back straight, because keeping the back straight helps the mind to be more clear and more concentrated. And also, as I said last night, it's good to try to keep your eyes open at least a little bit, because if we close our eyes, then there's the chance of becoming sleepy or drowsy. And even if that doesn't happen, the mind might be in a somewhat dull, dark state, which isn't so good for meditation. The best state of mind for meditation is a mind that is awake and alert and clear, bright. So keeping the eyes open a little bit so that there's light, a little bit of light coming into our eyes, helps us to have a more clear, bright state of mind. And if you look down onto your lap or onto the floor in front of you, then there isn't so much chance that you would be distracted by things that you see. So try to do that with your eyes. But some people find it really difficult to keep their eyes only partially opened, and then it becomes a kind of struggle trying to keep their eyes in that state. So if you do find it very difficult or very distracting, it is okay to let your eyes close as long as you can stay awake and not fall asleep. And like last night, let's start by taking 3 slow and deep breaths. And you can imagine the air going into any part of your body where there may be tension, physical tension, or emotional tension, or mental tension. And imagine the tension being released. And then imagine the tension going out of you when you exhale. So exhale slowly. Imagine any tension inside of you going out and disappearing, becoming non-existent. So do that for 3 deep breaths, and then continue to breathe in a normal, natural rhythm. So then one way of doing mindfulness practice is to use the breath as an object to focus the mind on. And it's good to try to keep your mind focused on each full inhalation and exhalation of the breath. So it's like you're following the breath with your mind, coming in and going out. And if you wish, you can count your breaths. One way of counting is to count each inhalation and exhalation as 1. So you can think, breathing in, breathing out, 1, breathing in, breathing out, 2, and then continue counting. You can count up to 5 breaths and then go back to 1, or you can count to 10 breaths and go back to 1, as you wish. The counting is just an aid to help you stay focused on the breath rather than wandering away. Then, while you're watching the breath, most probably other thoughts will appear in the mind, such as memories of the past or thoughts about the future. You might also become aware of sounds from outside or sensations in your body, feelings of discomfort or heat or cold and so forth. So other things could appear in your mind. And when this happens, just take note or be aware of those experiences, but try your best not to get caught up in thinking about them, getting obsessed with them, getting distracted by them. Try to just notice them, be aware of them, and then go back to the breath. So those other experiences can be thought of as being like clouds in the sky. Clouds are not permanent parts of the sky. They come and they go. They appear and they disappear. They don't stay permanently in the sky. So it's similar with the contents of our mind. Within our mind, different thoughts, images, feelings, all kinds of things appear and then disappear. Just the way clouds appear and disappear in the sky. So if we can just stay quietly watching our breath and observe the other experiences coming and going in our mind, then we can let them go and not be disturbed or distracted by them. So this is not easy to do, but try your best to do it. Try your best to mainly stay focused on the breath, being aware of the breath coming in and going out, but at the same time be aware of other experiences that happen in the mind, but just see them as being like clouds, coming and going. So observe them and then let them go, and return to focusing on the breath. So this is one way of practicing mindfulness. As I said before, if you know another way of practicing mindfulness that you're familiar with, then you can use that. open your eyes, let's spend a few more minutes generating a positive motivation as our reason for being here today. First of all, ask yourself, what was your reason for coming here, for being part of this workshop or course? What motivated you to come here? Sometimes we do things without really knowing why. We don't know what our real motivation is. And sometimes we do things with a motivation that is somewhat corrupt, like it's selfish, concerned only for me, or mainly for me, not concerned for others. So, even if that is the case, even if we have a corrupt motivation or an unclear motivation for doing something, such as coming here today, that's okay, because we can change our mind. Our mind isn't something set in stone, concrete, unchanging, but its very nature is impermanent. It changes all the time, and we can change our mind. So even if we didn't come here with a really positive altruistic motivation, we can still work on changing our mind so that we do have an altruistic motivation for being here. So one way we can do that is by contemplating how ourselves and others are basically the same, in that we all want happiness, and we do not want any unhappiness or problems or suffering. So this is something shared by everybody, by all people and all beings. So start with yourself. See if you can recognize that within your own mind or heart there is a feeling of wanting to be happy, wanting to have nice experiences, pleasant experiences, wanting not to have painful, bad, unpleasant experiences. Try to recognize that feeling or that attitude within your mind, within your heart. And there's nothing wrong with feeling this way. Some people might feel guilty about wanting to be happy. They might think that is selfish or greedy. I shouldn't feel that way. But that's not true. It's completely normal, completely natural to wish for happiness. And also we should be happy. We deserve to be happy. There's nothing wrong with being happy or wanting to be happy. From the Buddhist point of view, we deserve the highest, most perfect happiness of all, the happiness of enlightenment. We have the ability, the potential to attain that state, and we really should attain that state. It's like our human right to achieve the highest happiness. And also, if we can be more happy, we will have more enthusiasm or more energy to help others. So I've heard that studies show that people who are more happy tend to help others more, whereas people who are unhappy, miserable, depressed, tend to stay to themselves and don't help others very much. So if we can have more happiness, then we will naturally want to share that happiness with others, and we'll do more things that will help others. So that then it becomes beneficial not only for ourselves, but for others. But still, it's important that we recognize that we aren't the only one who wants to be happy. Others want to be happy as well. So think about the person sitting next to you. That may be somebody you know. It may be a stranger, someone you don't know. But either way, recognize that that is a human being. A human being just like yourself, with a human body, head, arms, legs, heart, brain, lungs. And there's so many things we have in common. We both started off our life as tiny babies in our mother's arms, totally dependent on our mother and father, very helpless, very needy. And due to the kindness of our parents and other people taking care of us, we got enough food to eat, and we got a good education, so we were able to grow up and become adults who are able to take care of themselves and function in the world and do lots of things. And recognize that deep inside of this person, in their mind or in their heart, they have the same wish for happiness that you do. Just as you want to be happy, that person wants to be happy. And just as you don't want unhappiness, pain, suffering, any kind of unpleasant experiences, the same is true for that person. Now open up your mind more, expand your awareness, and think of all the other people who are here today in this room, and understand that they are basically the same as you. A human being with a body and a mind, and within their mind or heart, they have the wish to be happy. They just want to be happy and have pleasant experiences, and they don't want any unhappiness, any unpleasant, painful experience. awareness expand even further. This awareness of the wish to be happy, the wish to not be unhappy. Allow that awareness to expand further beyond this room and think about the other people in this building. There are people living in this building, elderly people, middle-aged people, young people, babies, children, and maybe some animals as well, dogs and cats and birds. Understand that all those people and all those beings basically are the same as you. They just want to be happy, they don't want to be unhappy. Then let that awareness expand further to the surrounding buildings, houses, apartment buildings, office buildings, supermarkets, shops. So come to understand that all the people around us in this city and further beyond this city to this country and also neighboring countries. Understand that all the people, all the beings in those countries are basically the same as you. They all want to be happy, they don't want to be unhappy, to suffer. And understand that the same is true for all the people in countries further away, in the rest of Europe, and eastward into Asia, Russia, China, India, the Far East, further south into Africa, and going westward to North America, South America. So all across this world, this planet that we all share as our home, all the people, all the living beings inhabiting this planet feel exactly the same way. They all want to be happy, to have good experiences, and they don't want any unhappiness or bad experiences. So with that understanding or that awareness, let's see if we can generate an altruistic motivation. For example, you can think, may I learn things here today that will help me to be more helpful to others, to help them in their wish for happiness, to help them in their wish to not suffer. May I do whatever I can to help people and beings be happy and have less suffering. And may I learn ways or develop myself in ways that will bring this about. Is it too loud now? I feel like I'm bothering you with my throat clearing. It's okay?
Lite suddigt, ja. It sounds like in a box.
Det är lite högre. Sitter jag sån här.
Det är så här också.
Okay, so last night, in the talk last night, we kind of plunged right into emptiness, which is interesting to do. But realistically, emptiness is said to be something very, very profound. And to really understand emptiness, to get a real, genuine experience of emptiness, there are certain things we need to know beforehand. So we have to sort of take a gradual process, step-by-step process, before we can really understand emptiness. So I thought today to go back a few steps and take a more gradual approach to emptiness. So I've made a handout with some of the terms and mainly terminology. Not a lot of explanation, but terminology that is used in the teachings on emptiness, the explanations on emptiness, because a lot of this terminology is not everyday language, even for English-speaking people, and English isn't even your native tongue, so sometimes we can just get a little shaken by the terminology and a little lost in it. So you don't have to be looking at it right now, but from time to time as I introduce some of the terminology, I can point out where it is on the paper so that you can at least look at it. Sometimes that can be more helpful than just hearing it. So last night I already spoke about the importance of emptiness, why this subject is so important, and that hopefully that will become more clear as we go along. But it's very much related to the Buddhist view of things, the Buddhist explanation of things, which is vast. I mean, to really understand the Buddhist view of things is something that takes time, because it's quite different than what we are used to in our upbringing, Western philosophy, and maybe some of us were brought up in another religion, Christianity or Judaism, which has quite a different way of explaining the world and ourselves and why we're here and what's the purpose of life and so forth. So Buddhist explanation is really quite different, and it takes time to learn and also to understand, to be able to digest what the Buddha taught and get an understanding of it. So it's not something easy, but one way of getting a basic understanding of the Buddha's teachings is in his teaching on the Four Noble Truths, which you've probably all heard many times, but it doesn't hurt to review the Four Noble Truths, because it too is quite profound. It's not, there's only four things there, but to really understand the Four Noble Truths is something that takes quite a bit of time. In fact, we could spend our whole life just understanding the Four Noble Truths. So let's just do a quick review of the Four Noble Truths to remind ourselves of that. So the first is suffering, although the term suffering isn't such a good translation, because it tends to sound like something very heavy, very extreme, very horrible. like the suffering of war, the suffering of cancer, really horrible experiences. Whereas what the Buddha was talking about, the term in Pali, and I think Pali and Sanskrit are quite similar. Those are the two languages that are said to be used by the Buddha in his teachings. So the term is dukkha. And the meaning of that term seems to be more like unsatisfactoriness. Experiences which are just not completely satisfactory. So it includes more than extreme forms of suffering, like pain or depression or having cancer or being in the middle of a war. So it can include even the everyday aches and pains that we have, like even right now at this moment, sitting here. There may be some unpleasant experiences in your body, little aches and pains here and there. Or feeling a little bit too warm, or a little bit too cold, or a little bit hungry, or a little bit tired. Right? So these everyday experiences we have, which are not, maybe they're not really horrible, we may not call them suffering, but they're unpleasant. They're not completely pleasant, not completely satisfactory. We would be much happier if we didn't have them. So those are included in suffering, the First Noble Truth. And then on the mental or emotional level, again, there's kind of different degrees of suffering. There's extreme forms of mental suffering, for example, grief. Probably the most painful experience that people have is losing a loved one, somebody dying, somebody who's important to you, dying, passing away. The other day when I was coming here on the airplane, I had a newspaper, it was International Herald Tribune. I don't see newspapers very often, so whenever I can, I get a copy. And on the front page was a photograph of, there was a building that collapsed in Bangladesh, and I guess many people were killed, many others were trapped inside. They were still trying to find people in the rubble. So there was a photograph of a couple. It didn't say who they were, but they were probably parents of somebody who was trapped inside the building. Maybe one of their children was in there. And then the expressions on their face are just like, just the extreme grief of losing probably a child. That's probably the most painful loss that one could have if you're a parent and you lose a child. But, all of us have those experiences. We lose our parents, we lose siblings, we lose friends, we lose people who are important to us. So that's a very, very strong experience of mental suffering. But then there are other types of mental suffering which are less strong, less painful. Again, just little everyday irritations, things that we might be irritated by. An insect, for example, a little insect that's flying around and maybe tickling us, and we might try to brush it away, or many people would try to kill it. Or sounds that we might hear, or smells, odors that we might detect, or things that we might see, visual things that we find unpleasant and we feel, oh, I don't like that. So, again, any kind of experience we have on the mental level, the emotional level, the psychological level, which is not pleasant, but unpleasant, would be included in this First Noble Truth of true suffering. So there's a whole range of different kinds of experiences that are considered suffering by the Buddha. And this is a whole subject in itself. Mm-hmm. Suffering, we could talk a lot about suffering, go into all the different details, but we don't have time to do that. But anyway, the essential point is that all of us experience suffering. It's a natural part of life. among human beings, among not just human beings, animals, insects, all types of living beings, except for those who have attained higher states of mind, like Buddhas, enlightened beings, and there's another kind of being called Arhat, foe destroyer. So they have developed their minds to the point where they have eliminated suffering and the causes of suffering. So they don't have any more problems. They don't have any more unpleasant experiences, physical or mental or otherwise. But other than them, everybody else has problems. And that includes billionaires. You know, sometimes we may feel envious of people who have lots of money, millions of dollars, billions of dollars, or whatever currency you have in your country. People have huge, big houses and big cars and even private airplanes and yachts and so forth. We may think, oh, they must have such a nice life, but they have suffering too. If you just think about the fact that they have a body like ours, and this kind of body gets sick. It can get cancer, it can get heart disease, it can get all kinds of diseases. And they still experience hunger and thirst and getting old, just like we do. So even if you have billions of dollars, that doesn't stop your body from getting old and getting sick. And then they have emotional problems as well. They have people around them, family, friends, who die, who maybe they get into conflict with, get into problems with, emotional problems. So we hear about these celebrities and billionaires getting in and out of marriages, divorces, and also sometimes drug problems, alcohol problems, going into psychiatric hospitals and so forth. So that it's very clear that they have mental suffering as well. They're not free from mental suffering. So this can be a depressing subject. Sometimes there's this tendency, especially maybe in the Tibetan tradition, I don't know about other traditions, but they tend to talk a lot about suffering and point out all the different examples of suffering. And I mean, it is an important subject. We do have to recognize suffering. But I read in one of the books by the Dalai Lama that he said that if you're a person who has a tendency towards depression, then maybe it's better not to think about suffering too much. It could make you more depressed. And that's not the point. The point of looking at suffering isn't to become depressed. The point that the Buddha had in talking about suffering is to just make us realize that it exists, so that we will feel motivated to do something about it, to get ourselves out of suffering. Okay? So I think the ideal thing is to think about suffering to the extent that you are motivated to do something about it, but not to the extent that you become depressed. And then, because when you get depressed, then you feel hopeless. Everything seems hopeless. And that is completely wrong. You've gone in the wrong direction. You've gone too far. So I think we have to be careful, because many people in the West have a tendency towards depression. Tibetans don't seem to have much problem with depression. You know Geshe Tashi from London? Has he been here? Yeah. Yeah. So he's been teaching in the West. Anyway, he's been in the West for, I don't know, 20 or 30 years, and he knows English really well. He's very familiar with the West. And I heard him say that, I just don't understand depression. I try to understand it. I listen to people, I try to understand what they're talking about. I just don't understand it. I mean, I'm sure there are some Tibetan lamas who understand it, who experience it, but I don't think it's as common among Tibetans as it is among Westerners. So because we in the West do have more of a tendency toward depression, then I think we have to be very careful about this subject of suffering and not take it too far. Okay, and understand that we should just take it in doses, small doses, so that we get motivated to find a way out of suffering. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Because that was the Buddha's purpose. Buddha's purpose in talking about suffering is just to wake us up, to make us realize it's here. And it's not just outside of us, it's in us as well. It's not just other people who have suffering, but we ourselves have suffering. So we have to recognize our own experiences of suffering, because sometimes we can be blind to that. Like one of the first encounters I had with Buddhism was when I was in university in California. First year of university, still quite young and idealistic, and I met a woman who was a Zen practitioner. She was a student of Suzuki Roshi, the Zen master, who had lived in California. And I already had some interest in Eastern religion, so when I found out she was a Buddhist, a Zen practitioner, I was really interested. So I asked if we could have a talk. So we sat down one day and she started telling me something about Buddhism, and she started with the Four Noble Truths. So she started talking about the truth of suffering. And I immediately reacted. I said, how can you say that? How can you say there's suffering in life? Life is wonderful. Life is beautiful. And she just looked straight at me and she said, I can see that you're suffering. And it was just like a shock, almost like she hit me in the face. It was like, whoa. I couldn't say anything because she was right. It was true. I really had a lot of suffering, but there was somehow this wish to deny it, to pretend that it wasn't there. You know, like everything's fine, everything's okay, everything's wonderful. But in fact, it's not. You know, there really is suffering there. So I think that's why the Buddha spoke about suffering, is because people sometimes have this tendency to deny it, to pretend that it's not there, to not look at it. And if it's there, but we don't look at it, we don't accept it or acknowledge it, it's not going to go away by itself. It doesn't go away by itself. But if we acknowledge that it's there, we look at it, we accept it, then we can do something about it. And that's why, I mean, the truth of suffering is only the first truth, and there's 3 more. So let's go on to the other 3. So the second is the origin of suffering. So the origin of suffering is explaining where suffering comes from. Why do we have suffering? It's not just without causes. It has causes. And if we know what the causes are, then we can change the causes. We can do something about the causes. And if we can get rid of the causes, then we can get rid of the suffering. So this is a very important theme in Buddhism. And not just in Buddhism, apparently it was already there in Indian philosophy before Buddha's time, talking about causes and effects. What are the causes for things? If we know what the causes are, we can bring about changes. And it's similar to what happens in the West, for example, when there's some epidemic going around. Like I remember years ago, SARS. Yeah, this new disease was appearing and people were showing up in hospitals with this disease, and doctors were frantically trying to find a cure for it. And then, of course, health officials were looking for the cause of it. Where is it coming from? Where is this disease coming from? And how is it passed from one person to another? So that's really important to understand. Rather than just treating the people who are sick with it, if you don't know where it's coming from, then more and more people will keep getting it. You have more and more cases of it. Whereas if you can find the cause of it, the origin of it, then you can stop it. So that's similar with the Buddha's teachings. If we can understand the origin of our suffering, of our problems, then we can stop it. We can get rid of that. So what the Buddha discovered to be the origin of suffering, and he did this in his own experience, by looking at his own mind, his own experiences. He found that the origin of suffering lies within the mind, and in particular 2 things, 2 main things. One is karma, one is delusions. Delusions or afflictions. These are states of mind that are, we can call them negative or unskillful or incorrect. There are things like anger, greed, jealousy, pride, and ignorance. So there's a whole list of different delusions, but it said that the main one is ignorance, which I talked about last night, not knowing the true nature of things. So that factor exists in our mind, and because of that, other delusions arise. Because if we don't see the true nature of things, we're confused about the way things exist, about me, who I am, what I am, about others, how they exist, about the world around me, everything that I see. I'm confused about the way all these things exist. I don't see them realistically. I see them in a kind of mistaken way or distorted way. And then in that state of confusion, I make mistakes, other mistakes, like I get angry at people I don't like, people who appear unpleasant, or people who don't treat me the way I want to be treated and don't do what I want them to do, and so forth. So then anger comes up, hatred comes up, and that can get really extreme to the point of aggression, violence, killing, and so forth. And then towards people or objects, things that appear pleasant, that are the way I want them to be, do what I want, nice to me, pleasant to me, and so forth. Then there's the tendency to develop attachment, grasping, craving. I want those things for myself. I want to own those things, to keep those things, to control those things. And that leads to other kinds of problems, because we can't own things. We can't control things. It's not possible. And things change and die and go away, and then we feel disappointed, we feel grief, and so forth. And then other kinds of emotions come up: pride, jealousy, fear, depression. So all these emotional problems are rooted in ignorance, not seeing things in a correct way. And karma comes in because in this state of confusion and delusion and emotional turmoil, having these kind of destructive emotions coming up in our mind, then we act. We do actions. And the actions that we do, if they're motivated by some unhealthy state of mind like anger or greed, those actions become the cause for further problems, keeping us stuck in this situation of confusion, unhappiness, problems, and so forth. So this is just making it very short, but it's actually quite a complex explanation to understand the actual process of how karma and delusions keep us in a situation of suffering. This is explained in a more elaborate way by way of the 12 links, if you ever have a chance to study that, the 12 links of dependent origination, which is illustrated by this this painting on the wall. I think that's, my eyesight's not very good. The Wheel of Life?
Yeah. Reversed.
Wheel of Life, something's called Wheel of Life. So this is a traditional drawing or painting that illustrates these principles. In the very center of the wheel, there are 3 animals: a pig, a bird, and a snake. And they represent the 3 main poisonous states of mind, or toxic states of mind. The pig is ignorance, the bird is attachment, greed, craving, and the snake is anger. So those are the 3 main poisonous states of mind. And then surrounding that circle is a depiction of karma. It shows people, on one side, people being led upwards to kind of heavenly realms, good rebirths, nice places, and so forth, because of good karma, creating good karma. And on the other side, people are being dragged down into lower states of existence because of bad karma that they created. So if we, act wisely and compassionately and ethically and so forth, and in the future we'll have more pleasant experiences. But if we act unwisely, out of anger and greed and and act unethically and so forth, then the results in the future will be unpleasant ones. And then you have the depiction of the different realms of existence where we can be born. And then in the very outer rim of the circle, there are 12 sections that show the 12 links. So, anyway, the important point is to understand that the origin or the cause of problems, the painful experiences we have, lies mainly within our own mind. I say mainly because, of course, there are external conditions as well. Like if there's a virus going around, an epidemic going around, it's not just one's own karma that brings about getting sick. Yeah, we also have this external condition of some external bugs, what we call them bugs or viruses or whatever that we make contact with. But there's always some people who get it and some people who don't. Some people get sick, some people don't. So that shows the factor of karma. Buddhists would say, well, it's your karma to get it, to get sick. And even if you're working with people who are sick, and you don't get sick yourself, it's because you don't have the karma. So karma is one of the factors, but there are also other factors, other external factors that determine what kind of experiences we have. So then, the third truth is called true cessation. So cessation here means stopping or eliminating the causes of suffering, as well as suffering itself. So this third noble truth simply means that there exists the possibility of reaching the state where we have no more suffering, no more causes of suffering. So both suffering and its causes can be completely eliminated from our mind. And there are people, there are beings who have achieved that state. The Buddha himself achieved that. And many of his followers achieved that. And since the time of the Buddha, in the history of Buddhism, and even today, there are people who achieve that state of cessation. They just eliminate suffering and the causes of suffering from their mind. And that means you have no more suffering. No more suffering is there. So you have no more ignorance, no more anger, no more greed, no more, you don't create karma anymore. You have no more physical suffering, no more mental suffering. So it's a state of peace. Another term for this could be peace, a state of peace. Genuine, real peace. So this third noble truth simply points out the existence of such a state. Such a state does exist, and it is attainable. It's something we can attain. And then the fourth noble truth is called true paths. And this is like the solution, the remedy, or we could say the way to get there. Now path, the word path, normally when we encounter that, we probably think of a path in the forest, something we walk on to get from one place to another. But here, in the context of Buddhism, a path is actually a mind, a state of mind. It's something mental. Okay, so it's a realization, not just any state of mind, but a realization. The main true path, there are many true paths, but the main true path is the direct realization of emptiness. When through a process of learning about emptiness, meditating on it, and getting a better and better understanding of emptiness, and finally getting to the point where you directly see emptiness. Directly means non-conceptually. It's beyond conception. It's like your mind just directly, nakedly seeing emptiness. They say it's just like, we see the palm of our hand with our eyes very, very clearly. So we can reach that point where our mind directly sees emptiness, directly experiences emptiness. So that itself is an enlightenment. You're not yet enlightened at that point, but it's a very high stage of the path, a very important stage of the path. We have to get that experience to then eventually reach enlightenment. So that is the main true path, the direct realization of emptiness. And that direct realization of emptiness is the direct antidote to ignorance. So that is like the medicine that gets rid of the disease, yeah? That cures the disease. When you have that direct realization of emptiness, that destroys or makes non-existent the delusions, the afflictions, the emotional, destructive emotions in the mind, especially ignorance. So they don't all go at once, they go in layers, levels. So it's kind of a process of getting rid of them. But as long as you have that direct realization of emptiness, you have the key, you have the antidote, you have the medicine that's going to get rid of the causes of suffering. So that shows why it's so important to understand emptiness. I mean, there's lots of other aspects in the Buddhist teachings that we need to meditate on, like love and compassion, altruism, bodhicitta, generosity, patience, and ethics, and so forth. So there's many things we need to learn about and meditate on and practice and try to live, try to make part of our life. And those are all very, very important. But all of those other practices, no matter how wonderful they are, no matter how important they are, how beneficial they are, they don't get rid of ignorance. Those are not antidotes to ignorance. The only antidote to ignorance is the wisdom, realizing emptiness. Is this clear what I'm talking about? I'm kind of going quickly through some basic things, but I don't want to leave you feeling confused. So if there's anything you don't understand or anything you're confused about, please ask. Yeah? Okay. Also, you know, the word truth, when we talk about the Four Noble Truths, or the next point on that paper is the two truths. So, I don't know how it is in Swedish, but in English, I think the usual idea we have of a truth. A truth is something abstract, something kind of abstract, like an idea, a concept. Yeah? I mean, that's how I always understood the word truth, something that is a truth, or is true, something more abstract. But in Buddhism, when they use the word truth, it could be something like an idea, but it can also refer to actual things. For example, true sufferings. It's better to say true sufferings with an S, because it isn't that there's just one suffering, there's many sufferings. And like I said, they refer to things like sickness and pain and grief and depression. But not only that, true suffering, the term true sufferings also refers to physical things, like our body. Our body itself is a true suffering. So in fact, technically the term true suffering is said to refer to anything that originates from or comes from karma and delusions. Those two origins or two causes of suffering. Whatever comes about because of karma and delusions, whatever is produced by or created by or resulting from karma and delusions is a true suffering. So our body, this body that we have itself, is a true suffering. Our mind, even though we have within our mind, we have positive factors of our mind, and we have pure aspects of our mind which can eventually become enlightened mind. But our normal mind, the normal mind of a human being, an ordinary human being, is also true suffering. And also the things in our world, this planet itself, planet Earth, and the things in this world, mountains and trees and the things that we produce, clothes and furniture, cars, phones, computers, and so forth. So these are also true sufferings. Why? Because they originate from, or they are produced from, or they're created by karma and delusions. This is not easy to understand, but anyway, this is from the Buddhist point of view. It's quite different than in theological systems like Christianity, Judaism, and so forth. It is said that the world and all the people, all the beings, everything in the world originates from God. God is the creator, right? And God is this very wonderful, benevolent, wise, great being. So he is the creator of the world and everything. So it's said that the origin of the world and everything in the world and so on is something kind of wonderful, something pure. But then that leads to questions. Like, okay, if God is so wonderful and so loving and wise and perfect and so forth, why are there so many problems in the world? Why is there so much suffering in the world? So then it becomes difficult to answer that question. I mean, some people manage to find an answer to that question, but for me that was very troubling when I was young. But the Buddhist explanation is completely different. The world and all the beings, all the things, everything that happens in the world, it doesn't come from a pure origin. It comes from karma and delusions. It comes from ignorance. Okay? Ignorance is the creator. The basic root creator is ignorance and other delusions like anger and greed and then karma. So they're kind of impure factors, imperfect factors that produce the world. So if the causes or the origin or the creator of the world is imperfect, then it makes sense that the world is imperfect, right? You have an imperfect cause, imperfect creator, so the result is also going to be imperfect. So that's consistent. That makes sense. Do you see what I'm saying? Whereas if you try to say that the cause or the creator of the world is perfect, then it's difficult to explain how there's so many imperfections. How there's all these disasters, natural disasters, and human-made disasters, and holocausts, and terrorism, and so forth. How can all of that come from a perfect, pure, wise, loving creator? It's a little problematic. Sorry, you had a question?
You said before about the translation of suffering was perhaps more like unsatisfying. And isn't that also in this context that it sounds so one-sided when we think the world is in true suffering and everything is true suffering? Isn't it more like true unsatisfying?
Yeah. If you prefer the word.
Because otherwise it's hard for me to relate to everything is only suffering, because there are some little nice things.
I agree. There's ice cream. There's beautiful forests. It's true. I mean,
but they are not ultimately satisfying. But there is something nice about it.
Right. No, definitely, and certainly Buddhism acknowledges that. I mean, there is beauty, and Buddhism talks about other worlds that are even better than this one, more beautiful. Things are much better in other places than in this world. So for sure, there's acknowledgement that there, there's varying degrees of experiences, and some are really horrible, and some are really wonderful and beautiful. But still, even the beautiful and wonderful places and experiences and so forth, they're still not completely satisfactory, because for one thing, they don't last, they are impermanent, they change, they go away, and also because the origin of these phenomena, the original cause is karma and delusions. So that means they're kind of imperfect. They're not really perfect. If you look more carefully, you check more carefully, you'll see some flaws there. And also they're not completely satisfactory. I mean, you get bored. Right? Even if you live in the most beautiful place, like paradise, after some time you'll get bored with it. Right? So it doesn't sort of bring lasting, permanent, genuine happiness and satisfaction.
Also, I was thinking, because the mind of the human has some positive aspect in there, isn't also the causes of the phenomena a little bit mixed? So mostly probably impure, but there should be some aspect of purity in there also.
Sure. Like, for example, Buddhism talks about different worlds or different realms. So we are in the human realm. And the human realm is a good place. Yeah, to be in a human realm, to be a human being, we must have created some good karma, a lot of good karma. Otherwise, we'd be in a much worse place. So, definitely, we are experiencing the results. This world that we have is the result of, yes, it is karma and delusions, but it's good karma. There's a lot of good karma that came into production of this world and our bodies and so forth. So it's kind of mixture. But it's still karma. So, like, those who have achieved enlightenment, Buddhas and Arhats, the foe destroyers who achieved nirvana, they are beyond karma. Because karma, it's like you're not really free. As long as you're still caught up in karma, you're not completely free. Yeah, karma and delusion are a bit like being in prison. You know, I mean, even in a prison, you can sometimes have pleasant experiences. People in prison sometimes play basketball, or they watch a good movie, or they have a good meal, or a visit from a friend. So they sometimes enjoy themselves. But nevertheless, they're still stuck within the prison walls and the barbed wire, and they don't have complete freedom. So it's like that. As long as we're still caught up in karma and delusions, even if it's good karma, it's still not complete freedom. We're still not completely free. So this is something kind of subtle. You know, it's like when it comes to things like karma, delusions, suffering, and so forth, there's different degrees, different levels. There's really coarse forms of suffering and coarse forms of delusions, and then there's more subtle ones, subtle types of suffering, which are not as easy to understand. Quite a complex subject. Yeah.
I was thinking, someone like His Holiness, for example. I mean, he's apparently in this world and supposedly not experiencing any suffering, which makes it interesting to the objectivity of these true sufferings, because if the world are true sufferings, and he's in the world and not experiencing suffering.
Well, when I said the world is true suffering, I meant like this planet Earth and everything in the Earth. According to the Buddhist explanation, this world originally came about as a result of collective karma, the collective karma of sentient beings who still have karma and delusions and create the causes for a world to come into existence and so forth. But definitely there can be people or beings in the world, living in the world, walking around with us, looking like us, but if they have freed their minds from suffering and the causes of suffering, if they have achieved true cessations and true paths, then they are not suffering. They may be in the world, but not experiencing the suffering of the world. So, for example, this is what bodhisattvas do. Bodhisattvas don't want to escape from the world. They want to escape from suffering and the causes of suffering. They want to free their minds from ignorance and karma and delusions and so forth. But they want to stay in the world to help others. So they deliberately choose to come into the world. But that's a different thing than those of us who are just thrown into the world because of our karma and delusion. We don't have any choice. It's not a choice for us. For them it's a choice, and they have control over things. So they can be in the world but not affected by it, not suffering, not experiencing suffering the way we do.
I have a question. You talked about His Holiness the Dalai Lama, that he was not suffering. I think he is suffering as well.
because he could feel fear. He told me once he was afraid of flying. He was not very comfortable flying with other people and so on. And he had pain when he was sick. He was in pain.
Yeah, I mean, I am not in any position to say where His Holiness is in terms of spiritual development. And when people ask him, I mean, he says, I'm just a simple Buddhist monk, you know, I've got a little bit of experience, but I haven't really achieved anything. So he doesn't claim to be at some level. Now, if you ask a Tibetan, they will say, oh, he's Buddha. He's Buddha, or he's a Bodhisattva, he's Avalokiteshvara. But it's difficult to know exactly where he is. He could be a Buddha, he could be a Bodhisattva, he's just pretending to be a simple Buddhist monk, still trying to follow the path. But
I think he's a Bodhisattva. Yes, but also, I think also Bodhisattvas could feel pain, and they could feel like fear, for instance. I was very surprised when he said he was afraid of flying. Then I think, oh, then it's really dangerous in some way.
But maybe he's teaching us by saying that.
They do say, what I've learned is that there are different levels of bodhisattvas. They have like 10, what they call the 10 bhumis, the 10 grounds or levels that a bodhisattva passes through on their way to enlightenment. And the first ground is when they generate spontaneous bodhicitta. Bodhicitta, the altruistic intention to become enlightened, arises naturally and spontaneously. They don't have to generate bodhicitta, it's just right there. So when they achieve that, then they achieve the first, oh no, wait a minute, no, I'm wrong, I'm sorry, take that back, I'm wrong. When they develop spontaneous bodhicitta, they achieve the path of accumulation. That's the first of the 5 paths. And then second of the 5 paths is called the path of preparation. And that is achieved when one has a realization of emptiness, not a direct realization of emptiness, but a realization of emptiness which is a combination of calm abiding and special insight. So it's quite anyway, it's a powerful realization. So then the third path is called the path of seeing. And the path of seeing is when they have a direct realization of emptiness, directly seeing emptiness. And that's when they achieve the first ground, the first of the 10 grounds. It's a little complicated. So you have 5 paths and 10 grounds. And the way they work is the 10 grounds start on the 3rd path. Okay, the path of seeing. So the first of the 10 grounds starts when they directly realize emptiness. And it's said that when a bodhisattva has that direct realization of emptiness and achieves the first ground, they achieve what's called a mental body, or a body of the nature of mind. And it's not a physical body like this, and they don't experience pain. And they say even if a bodhisattva is cut, you know, chopped up in pieces or tortured, they don't experience pain. They don't experience pain. However, they still show the aspect of having a body that gets sick and gets old and dies, but this is more just to fit into the world, to fit into people's expectations. But in reality, you know, they're free of those kinds of sufferings, of sickness, pain, and disease and death and so forth. So, I don't know. They say it's really hard to know where somebody is at, unless you're at the same level that they are. So if you were a first ground bodhisattva, then you'd know who else is at that level, who else has directly realized emptiness. But for those who are not yet at that level, we can only guess. Yeah, it's tricky. But anyway, I mean, definitely His Holiness is way up there, somewhere, way up beyond me. Okay, so then I was talking about the truths. So the word truth doesn't just mean something abstract, like an idea, but it can also refer to physical things. So let me just briefly talk about the 2 truths. I thought maybe we should have a break at some point. Do you want to have a break now? Yeah, maybe that's better before we get into the two truths. That's another sticky subject. So let's have a break for 10-15 minutes.